When you grow up with a family of builders, you learn a thing or two about building. Those aren't mine. Actually, mine are red. But that's about the one main difference with a woman behind the construction company versus the guys. Our group of companies started with my grandfather back in 1934. And today, 78 years later, I'm the third generation, and I guess one of those 1 in 10 that actually make it. And so far, 10 years later, we are making it. I'm from the Georgian Bay chapter, actually Barrie, and I'm here to talk to you about not only Bertram Construction, but the Bertram group of companies. Our core foundation is the construction business. It started with construction. Actually, my grandfather was a barn builder, which then became a house builder, and when the Industrial Revolution took off, he became a factory builder. And back, I forget whose slide it was, but somebody said in the 60s when industry in the Barrie area was a huge thing. And so we concentrated on industrial, commercial, and institutional building, some multi-unit residential, but that was mainly our market. And over the years, of course, this has changed, with industrial becoming a very small part of our market today. But in the 1950s, with my grandfather aging a bit and 2 sons up and coming, my father joined the company. And my father's knack was retail. And so there was no real lumber stores. There was one lumber store in town. So he decided to open up a lumber store to go along with the construction company. And through my dad's career with the business, he had grew that one lumber store to 5 lumber stores. They also added equipment rental businesses, starting with 1. And I think the whole point behind the equipment rental business was really just to fuel our own construction company. But an opportunity arose after a few years to add more rental companies, buying out a local family-owned business that wasn't going to the next generation with Harold Martin Rental, and growing into 7 equipment rental companies in and around the community. Back then, we did a lot with wood. And so if we have the wood and you have the lumber store and you have the construction company and you have the equipment, it makes sense to manufacture the trusses. And so we opened a truss manufacturing company as well. And for some bizarre reason, that spun into a flea market. And for the life of me, I really don't know why, other than the fact that I think Ted, my uncle, wanted to build it, because it was a big building. And it, over the years, has had 4 additions to make it bigger buildings. You know, we can talk about business, but this is cafe, so we have to talk about the business family. My grandfather, on your left, sorry, I'm backwards. This is actually an opening of one of his stores. He founded the business. He saw the foresight to need the construction company in our area, as well as the retail, the equipment, although the sons got involved. And we're heavily involved. Actually, my dad is the second person back on the right, and my uncle's the furthest person back. My grandfather was the founder and kind of the brains behind it all. He wasn't formally educated. I think he had a grade 5 education. He just was very good with his hands. And he had a knack for people and for business and honest business. My father, after finishing high school, well, you call it finishing high school, when you finish football after the football season, then you go to business, right? That was it. That was the finishing high school for my dad. As I said, his love was the retail side of things, not the construction side. And so he went in and ran all the retail side, so all the lumber stores and most of the rental companies as well. And my Uncle Ted, who is about my dad's 5 years younger brother, his love was construction. He was the first member of the family to get a post-secondary education, going to George Brown and into the construction management project or program. And he joined the company in the 1960s. You know, as second-generation business brothers, it's easy, as we said, 1 in 3. 1 in 3 is success. I don't actually listen to that, because if you did, it's depressing. But not only were they business brothers and in business with their father, they were also best of friends. They worked together, they fished together, they learned to fly together, and until the day my dad died, we're best buddies. Come the third generation, 5 grandkids. And the only one that showed any interest in the business was myself. Everybody else was free to follow their passions. My sister is a professor at Carleton University. Actually, she's an assistant dean in the biology department. My cousin Josh is an international businessman. My cousin Sydney, she's a commercial pilot with Air Canada. I have another sister, Jen, who has 2 little kids and is a stay-at-home mom. But my dad saw an early knack for me. I liked to build things, and I liked engineering, and I liked math. So when I showed an interest in going into industrial engineering, he, of course, pushed me to structural engineering. So they all got choice. I didn't. I love what I do. I'm very, very fortunate to be pushed in a direction and love what I do. In 1998, I joined the 1993, I joined the construction company, and I only ever joined the construction company. And in 98, I bought my dad out of the construction company. And so Ted and I became 50-50 partners in the construction company. But we must remember, there's the lumber stores, there's the retail, the rental companies, and there's the 400 market. In 98, things changed a bit. With box stores coming into our area, my dad and uncle saw, by that point in time, they had bought out my grandfather, but my dad and uncle saw that their future was either to go big or go home. So they went home. They sold the companies. They sold everything but the construction companies, other than the properties. So they became land bakers, developers. I bought the construction company, and they still hung on to that flea market. And we kept building additions. We talk about succession, and succession is so important, as people have already alluded to in the family business. But in 98, succession changed. I became third generation. We sold a bunch of the businesses, with the exception of that flea market. And I started to look at my uncle, who was my 50-50 partner. My dad had never worked in construction, and he was deciding to live half a year in Florida and half a year in Barrie area with my mom. And so then it was me. My uncle was still involved, but he lives, 4 days a week at the cottage and skis, and the rest of the time in Florida. So really, there wasn't a lot of succession other than myself. So what we decided to do was open it up to our employees. And so I'm talking about only the construction company now. Don Eagles had been in the construction business when we got him for 32 years. And he became one of our partners, buying in, an employee, heading up our sales, and a shareholder. And that was 10 years ago. He retires tomorrow with 3 weeks' notice. Don't you love change? And Mark Greenwood is our chief estimator and one of our long-term employees, and so he bought in about 3 years ago. And so today, Mark is a very small shareholder. Ted still owns shares in the company but does not work in the company. And then there's me. So as far as the future, I'll get to that. My mom and my dad, Sandra and Barry Bertram. Little twist came on things about 2 years ago when we found out my dad had cancer. Everything seemed fine. Oh yeah, you're going to be solved, no problem. And then about a year ago, things aren't so fine. And about 8 months ago, we lost Dad to cancer. Thankfully, we had some time. We had some time up front, and we had some time to plan. He had his succession in place for his companies, being the holding companies for the properties and the 400 market. And his succession plan was my mom would run them. My mom has never worked in the business of any sort. She worked in banking before I was born. Great plan, Dad. And so knowing this, I'm like, yeah, maybe you could just show me a little bit about this business. So the last 8 months have been a little difficult. I've lost my dad, my mentor, my confidant, and gained 2 businesses. At the same time, it's been just as difficult on my uncle because he lost his best friend and his business partner. And so his solution is skiing, cottage, Florida. So I've also lost my uncle in a lot of ways. But that's change. That's life. It's okay. And thankfully, holding companies are fairly easy to run. And so are flea markets. So the next generation, this is actually a fairly recent picture. There's 5 grandchildren on my dad's side. None on my uncle's side. And everybody's under 14. I have no idea what the 4th generation will be, but I do know that we're a business family. What that'll look like is to be determined. Thanks.